already know that. We just want to make sure we're all on the same page there. Rates, percentage, revenue is dollar amount. So that was kind of the basic terminology. Then we started getting into the concepts. We started dealing with the different types of concepts. And from there, we discussed the 3 different types of taxes. So you're going to see a few questions on these. So you want to understand the difference between the 3. So the first one we talked about was a proportional tax. Who remembers what a proportional tax is?
It's everyone pays the same rate. It's a fixed percentage.
Okay, everyone pays the same rate. And as we recall from our basic terminology here, everyone pays the same rate. That means everybody pays the same percentage. And what is a perfect example for a proportional tax? Who remembers?
Sales tax?
Sales tax. That is correct. Sales tax is a proportional tax. So we all pay the same tax rate, the same percentage. Obviously, we pay different dollar amounts because the dollar amount is going to depend on how much money you spend. But the rate is the same for everybody. So if you saw like a quiz question that said, give me an example of proportional tax, could you possibly do that? Yes. Okay, cool. So that's a proportional tax. Or you might see one that will say, which of the following these taxes would be classified as a proportional tax. That's the kind of application questions you're going to see. All right. Then we got into progressive. Who remembers the definition, not example, but definition of a progressive tax? Holler it out.
As income increases, tax rate increases,
Okay.
And vice versa.
Cool. So tax rate and income move in the same direction. So an increase in income would see an increase in rate. And the inverse is also true. So income and tax rate move in the same direction. We only have one type of progressive tax in the United States, which is your income tax. Income tax is a progressive tax. So now we are going to talk about, we spent a whole class talking about how to calculate income tax rates. So we'll go over that again real briefly. But income tax is a perfect example of a progressive tax, meaning that the tax rate that I pay will be different than the tax rate that you pay if we have different incomes. And last one is a regressive tax. Who remembers the definition for regressive tax?
As income increases, tax rate decreases, or as income decreases, tax rate increases.
All right, so now our income and tax rate move in opposite directions. So as income increases, tax rate decreases, and the inverse is also true. So they move in different directions. So I gave you a really easy way to determine if a tax is regressive or not. Who can remember the easy way to determine if a tax is regressive?
If the price that you're paying stays the same.
Okay, if everyone pays the same dollar amount. So if we all decide we're going to do a field trip down to Red Rock State Park here in Sedona, they're going to charge you $7 to get in. That's a state park. That money goes to the Arizona Department of Parks, which is a government entity, so we know that's a tax. If every one of us pays $7 to get in, that is a regressive tax. The more money that you earn, the lower percentage that $7 fee is of your income. Less money you earn, higher percentage of your total income goes towards that tax. So that's a regressive tax. That is your key right there. If everyone pays the same dollar amount, it's a regressive tax. All right, so you'll see a couple questions there where you'll have to identify either the type of tax or give an example of regressive, proportional, or regressive tax, things like that. Any questions on those concepts or terms?
Could you scroll back up for just a second?
Yep, sure thing. Yep. All right, so that was that first day. Then we got into a little bit about the history of income tax. I'm not going to ask anything about the history. That was just kind of our introduction to income tax and understanding why income tax. We have the process we do now, where our employer takes money from our paychecks before we get it every week, 2 weeks, month, however often you get paid. And then at the end of the year, you even up with the government. If you paid too much, if your employer took out too much, they will give you the amount that you overpaid back. So it's kind of like if you pay with cash and you get your change back, except this time you have to wait a year to get your change back. So that was just a little bit about the history. I also find it pretty interesting. I think I always think it's important to know, especially with economics, of the stuff, the processes that we have in place now and the way that things work. It's not just random occurrences out of nowhere. Everything has caused what we have today. I'm not saying that's good or bad. Sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing. Sometimes things we have in place now are very outdated. Sometimes they're very effective. So I just think it's important to understand where these things come from. It wasn't just, we didn't wake up one day and decide, hey, let's have our employers take this money out. There's a reason behind all of that. And there's a good chance you didn't cover that in history. So I figured might as well throw in some fun history while we are at it. All right, then we got into calculating income tax. If you recall, this is the day that you were like, economics is so much fun. I love the class. And then we did this day and you're like, man, this sucks. Adam's making us do math. He's so mean. All right, so we're going to do math again. So the numbers we used to calculate this in class were kind of oddball numbers because we used the actual current tax rates. On the quiz, I'm going to make the math a whole lot easier and a lot simpler. Again, I want you to understand the concept. I don't want you to get bogged down with how many numbers you can type in your calculator. So the math is going to be a lot easier on the quiz because if you understand the process, it doesn't matter how many different tax rates there are, how many different the dollar amounts there are, how many rates there are. There could be 14, there could be 3. If you understand the concept, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to give you one. I'm going to make up one here just for our class to make this a little bit easier. So we're going to do a 10%, 25%, and a 50%. And this is going to be anywhere from 0 up to $100,000. And this is going to be $100,001 all the way up to $500,000. And this is going to be anything over $500,001. Let's make this into a fun looking. Okay, so over here you have your tax bracket and you have your tax rates. So this is no different than the table that we first used that shows our current tax rates. All I did here was simplify the numbers to make it easier. So let's go right to a challenging one. See if you remember how to do this. See if you can figure out what your tax dollar amount is on an income of $200,000. based on that information, not our current tax dollars, but the information I have up here, see if you can calculate what's your income tax on $200,000.
$34,999.75.
Got a 34.99975. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a rounding. Yes. So control this out. Everybody else's calc is done. All right. So if you want, you can use the process we had in class, or you can kind of figure this out in your head pretty quickly as well. So remember, in class, we used our number lines because number lines are easy. So first thing I did was took the number line and drew up our tax brackets. Next thing we're going to do is put our tax rates in there. All right, so $200,000. If you recall that the order, the process we're doing things in, first thing we want to do is mark 200,000 on our number line, and that's going to be somewhere right around here. $200,000. Next thing we do is we start from 0 and we work our way over to calculate every dollar per percentage. So we start here at 0 and we work all the way to our first point, which is $100,000. And we know this is $100,000 because 100,000 minus 0 equals 100,000, and take 10% of that. So we're going to take $100,000 times 10%, and that's going to equal, it's even an easy one, $10,000. Then we're going to go from here. We're going to hop over to here, figure out that difference. That's another $100,000 difference. We multiply that now by 25%. 25% of 100,000. That's another easy, do that in your head. Add those together. 34. Oh, I'm sorry, 35. Ooh. I know the answer. I just didn't write down the answer because I know how to add 10,000 and 35,000. All right, 35,000. I think you got 34,975 if you skip this $1 here, which on the quiz would be correct. So an income of $200,000 based on this information, you would pay $500,000. Let's try one more. Just want to make sure that you guys understand this. Ooh. Let's do a big $600,000. Pretend like you teach at CCC. Just for the record, I don't make $600,000 a year. You got 160? Is that what you said? All right, let's check and see if we got this correct. Start at 0. Boom, we know that's 100,000. So we take 100,000, that by 10%, and we get $10,000. We're going to go from here to here. 500,000 minus 100,000 is going to give us 400,000. Multiply that by 25%. 1/4 of 400,000 equals 100,000. And our last number here, where are we at? 600,000 here. Right there is another 100,000. By 50%. It's going to give us 50,000. Add those together. You get $160,000. So based on this information, on an income of $600,000, you're going to pay $160,000 in income tax. Sometimes it's easier to see with these easier numbers. And some of you could probably just bang these out in your head. Please double check your work with a calculator. as easy as it sounds. It would just be terrible to get something wrong because you tried to do it in your head really quickly on a quiz that has no time limit. So that is our calculations. You will see 2 calculation questions on the quiz. Any questions on how this is done? Cool. This is the one thing I find, this is just every semester, having taught this for the last 15 years, how to do this. This is the one question everybody stresses out about, and then everybody gets it right. So that's good, as long as you get it right. Just don't stress too much, you'll lose all your hair. All right, any questions on how these calculations are done? Like I said, if you can do that, you know more than and understand more about income taxes than like 90% of the population. I had to show my dad how this was done after he worked full-time for almost 5 decades. He just never knew how it was done. So it was kind of, I always said, we should talk about this. All right, then we got into Social Security. We talked about Social Security and Medicare. All right, Social Security and Medicare, these are kind of the common terms that most people use. The technical terms, Social Security is OASDI, which is that Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance. And these are cash payments made to individuals who reach a certain age, or the spouses or children of individuals who reach a certain age, or anybody that has, not anybody, but people that have physical or psychological disabilities that prevent them from working. That's what OASDI is. And then Medicare is known as HI or hospital insurance. And hospital insurance is just what we called medical insurance back in the 1960s when this all started. We'll talk about the history of medical insurance later in the course too. That's kind of interesting. That's one of those things also that hasn't been around forever. And it wasn't like it was just invented out of thin air either. So it's kind of an interesting history of how medical insurance started. All right, so we have OASDI and HI. Does anybody remember what percentage of your pay goes towards OASDI?
6.9?
I heard a 6.2 and a 6.9.
Mine was a random memory guess. Candace probably got it written down.
I have it written down.
Okay. 6.2%. I was like, you guys can fight over this if you want, but we don't need that right now. Okay.
Sure, come at me, Hannah.
You're lucky I'm here on Zoom. All right. So OASDI, you are paying 6.2% of your paycheck. This is different than income tax now. This is in addition to income tax. You're paying 6.2%. How about hospital insurance? Anybody remember how much you're paying for hospital insurance?
$1.45%.
Correct, 1.45%. Add those two together, and you pay a total of 7.65%. In addition to your federal income tax. Something else we didn't cover in class, but I think it's always good to know. So you pay 7.65%. Your employer also pays the same amount. So really, you've got about 15.3% of a tax. You pay half, your employer pays half. So your employer is also paying 7.65% of your pay going into OASDI and HI. You don't need to know that, but it's kind of a, I don't think we talked about that in class. All right, so that is our 2 tax rates that we're paying. We talked a little bit about the history of OASDI and a little bit about the history of hospital insurance. We looked at the rates a little bit about when they started at very, very low rates and been going up ever since. So just based on this information, before we add in another piece of information, what type of tax is this?
Proportion.
Okay, it's a proportional tax because we're all paying the same tax rate. Now we're going to throw in the thing that makes it tricky. We have the maximum taxable earnings. Maximum taxable earnings. And this is a number, and the number increases every year, or I should say it changes every year. It doesn't necessarily increase. Changes every year. And anytime you earn above that, or any dollar you earn above that amount, you no longer pay tax, your Social Security and OASDI, on that amount. So then what type of tax does it become?
Regressive.
Then it becomes regressive. So now we've got two types of taxes. We've got one, the first part below the maximum taxable earnings is a proportional tax. Above that is regressive. So let's give an example. I'm going to use easier numbers. Again, I want you to understand the concept, focus more on the concept than on the math behind it. So let's say that, we'll keep this easy. Let's say the maximum taxable earnings are $100,000. So we're going to use the same percentages. So if you earn $100,000, how many dollars will you be paying in OASDI and HI?
7,650.
Okay, so you're going to pay 7,650. That was easy because 100,000, we just moved the decimal point 3 spots to the right. So if you earn $100,000, you pay $7,650 in OASDI, which is 7.65% of your entire pay. So let's compare that to somebody that earns twice that. You earn $200,000 now. How many dollars are you going to pay in OASDI and HI? Remembering our maximum taxable earnings are $100,000. Same amount, that is correct. You're going to pay $7,650 as well, even though you earn more money. If we figure out what percentage of your total income this is, you don't need to do the math, but since we doubled this number, we know that we just need to cut that number in half. If you do that, it's 3.825%. So this person that earns $200,000 is paying a lower overall tax rate of their entire income than the person that pays $100,000. So it's proportional up until those maximum taxable earnings, because everyone pays the same tax rate. Then above that, because you're not paying any more tax, your income goes up, but the amount of tax you pay does not. So the amount of tax you pay becomes a smaller percentage of your total income. That tends to be a confusing concept as well. Any questions on that?
How do politicians decide when and how to raise the amount?
Usually, let me give you the sarcastic answer first. They take the magic 8-ball and they squish it around and they're like, well, that looks about right. We're going to use that number. Now, really, where they get the number is they take generally an approximate rate of inflation. So if you look historically, it's generally between 2 and 3% per year. On average, that's what our inflation is. It tends to be around 2 to 3% per year. That's usually a good way to get that number passed without saying too much, without getting too much heat for that, and they can make it whatever they want. This is part of the annual tax law, which gets changed, put in, if you remember way back, how a bill becomes a law. This is our annual tax law. So they can do whatever they want. They could say, let's get rid of maximum taxable earnings, or let's bump them up to $1 million. They could say all that, do all that, or they could say, let's not have any maximum taxable earnings, let's bump it down to $50,000. They can change all this stuff around. It tends to be, if you're like, hey, we're going to raise it by the rate of inflation, that's one of those things that nobody's really going to argue too much about. So it's almost, maybe for lack of a better term, laziness to get that pushed through, knowing that nobody's really going to fight that because that tends to be a good justification. We'll raise it by the rate of inflation, rather than maybe questioning the fact of why do we have this in the first place. That becomes very political. Even though this is economics and we can say would be the best way to solve things, when you mix economics and politics, you don't always get the best solutions. So usually it's just simply raised by the rate of inflation. And you can look, I'd give you the link for that one thing. You could look at the increases over the last 30 years, and they generally hover somewhere between 2% and 5% per year. And again, there aren't many people out there that are really pushing for, nobody's going to say, I'm not going to vote for you because you said maximum taxable earnings have to go up by 2%, and I think they should go up by 4%. Most people don't even know this exists because most people earn less than the maximum taxable earnings. So it's not really a big political hot button. So they're just like, well, here's an easy thing to do. Let's just call 2%. Okay, let's vote and move on. Let's argue about less important things like tax brackets and tax rates. I'm kidding about them being less important. Okay, so there's your sarcastic answer and then the actual answer. But it's about as close to let's look in the magic 8 ball as you can imagine. Probably more closer to let's call our psychic and find out what we should raise these to. Good question. Cool. All right, so the last thing we got into, we talked about the Laffer curve. And if you remember, Art Laffer came up with didn't come up with it, but kind of drew it out a little bit. Let's pull this down so I can. The Laffer curve up here, you had tax revenue. Down here, you have tax rate. And he said that, you've got these points that we already know about, and they kind of go up. At some point, they go up, and then at some point, they come down. So he said, your important point right here is this. We don't know what that is at all. Basically, what Laffer was saying was there's some point there's some tax rate that will maximize tax revenue, that we will not be able to collect any more tax revenue. It's just because people respond to incentives, people change their behaviors based on taxes. So he said there's some rate out there that will get the most. We don't know what that rate is. But what he said was, we know that if we change tax rates, all we can do is change tax rates. We can't control how people react to those changes. So he said, the only thing that you can focus on is tax rate. Tax revenue will just be a function of that tax rate. So if you remember, the overriding concept here was, well, what happens when you change tax rate? What happens when the tax rate goes up, or what happens when the tax rate goes down? The only full true answer is I don't know. Because you don't know what's going to happen to tax revenue. And if you remember with the discussion we had, it's very much like a price. If you own, you sell something, you own a store, you sell t-shirts. If you raise the prices or lower the prices, you can do that. You can raise and lower your prices all you want. You don't know how people are going to react to those price changes. You don't know if you lower your price, maybe nobody really buys anymore. So now you're losing money. Or maybe a ton of people buy more and now you're making more money. If you raise your price, maybe nobody buys your stuff anymore. Or maybe people continue to buy it. So your revenue can go up and down. The only thing you can control is the price. So the idea behind this is the only thing you can control with tax rates or the taxes or the rates, which is essentially a price. Tax rate is a price. So ultimately, Laffer said nobody knows what's going to happen to tax revenue. You could pay people a lot of money to make an educated guess, and very often those educated guesses can be relatively close, but the fact is they're still guesses. You don't know what's going to happen when you change tax rates. And the idea behind this, and one of the reasons I teach this is, you hear a lot of times in politics, well, we had and you're going to hear this maybe not so much in Northern Arizona because we did pretty well in 2020, but you've got a lot of states and cities, especially in the East Coast, that have not been doing well as far as tax revenue because of COVID. So a lot of what they're talking about now is we're going to have to raise tax rates because if we want to continue to provide all these services, we're going to need, we don't have enough money. People weren't buying as much stuff, so sales tax was lower. Property values went down, so we're not getting as much property tax. However, different cities and states fund themselves. So to say things like, well, we need to raise tax rates. Well, raising tax rates doesn't necessarily bring in more money. So the fact is, I don't know. So rather than, hearing, I just think it's a good thing to question. Why are you changing tax rates? What do you think the outcome of a changed tax rate will be? These are the kind of questions that should always be asked. It's not simply raise the tax rate because we need more tax revenue or lower the tax rate because we need less tax revenue or we want to give people more money. The question should always be, why do you think this is going to happen? Why do you think this change in tax is going to, or change in tax is not going to impact people's behavior? So there's your answer for number 10. Your answer for number 10 is I don't know. And you'll see what the question is. But everybody should get question 10 right now. And this is the only time in your career, college career, I think that you can write I don't know and have that be the specific answer. All right, there's your quiz. Any questions on what we covered or anything at all? All right.